Is on airplane. Get constant buzzing.
Can everyone hear me okay? You guys can hear me in the back? Yes, yes? Okay. All right, guys. Welcome to another Windy City REI monthly meetup. We're so excited for today. Thank you, everyone who's here on a beautiful Chicago weekend. We did not expect many people, so we're very happy to see everyone here. Not because of our guests, but because of the weather. Let's give a big round of applause for Navigator Tap Room because they let us hold our meetings here, and just support them by keeping your glasses full. We'd really appreciate it. And something that I usually don't do is actually introduce myself. My name is April. I co-host this meeting with a couple of really awesome people, Chris, Angela, and Ben, and my husband, Julian. If you guys can raise your hand, hello, so everybody knows. So we hold this monthly meetup because we love real estate. We love being around people who love real estate. And, you know, we just had a baby and they're about to have a baby, and Ben's always busy. And we find the time to kind of be here because it reminds us of our goals and why we love it. And so thank you for being here, because without you guys, there'd be no meetup. So thank you guys.
Great people.
And I'd like to introduce our really special guests. So if you guys haven't heard of them, you must not be listening to Straight Up Chicago podcast, because they've been on there multiple times. We have Jake and Mike from the Axon group. And then we have John and Sharon from Forte Properties. Let's give them a round of applause. If you've ever heard of that 80-20 rule where 80% of your output comes from 20% of the work you put in, these people are the 20% right now in like the Chicago real estate market. These are the people you want to be talking to if you want to get deals done. So we're super honored to have them here so that we can ask them a bunch of questions that I need the answers to and that you guys need the answers to as well. I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves and kind of give us a little bit of a background. So Jake and Mike, you guys can start first.
Sure. So my name is Jake. Mike and I co-lead the Axon group. We hang the license with EXP Realty, so nationwide brokerage. That much better. So we're in general investment friendly team, right? So majority of our clients are buy side clients in the 2 to 4 unit or small multifamily space. And that's where our experience lies and where we like to leverage those relationships. We service Chicago and up to about 50 miles outside the city. I'll let Mike chime in a little bit more if he has anything else to add.
Yeah, not a whole lot to add, but just, on top of running an investment focused team, we're both investors and, have pretty sizable portfolios. And so, not that all together matters, but it comes from a place of experience when we're working with clients that, hey, we've seen how it works every single day in the real world. So we're not just somebody who's read books, and I know these guys are also very experienced investors as well. So I think that's something that's super important when it comes to teams like ours up here, is that you're not just getting somebody who knows how to run numbers because they listen to Bigger Pockets or read a book, but we're doing it every single day, working with clients, but then for ourselves as well.
John and Sharon, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Go for it. Ladies first.
All right. So John Warren and Sharon Knickerbocker with Forte Properties. We are our own small brokerage. So there's actually John and me and then one other agent that we work with. We have a pretty good mix of working with investors from anywhere from 2 to 4 units and larger for residential. And we also work with some traditional clients as well. I don't know what John wants to add.
Yeah. I've been an agent for just under 10 years now, which is crazy. It feels like a blink. It's all, but I also invest in commercial properties. I don't invest in 2 to 4 units. In fact, I own one. It's currently under contract. It was my first deal, and it will hopefully be a commercial property soon. That's always been, so I never felt good about competing with clients. So I would always tell them, hey, I don't buy 2 to 4 units. That way I can only bring you good deals. So anyway, so that's what I do. Most of my investing has been either in the near western suburbs or in the north side. I have a nice little portfolio growing in Irving Park, Albany Park. Good stuff up there. It's been kind of fun getting to experience the north side the last 2 years. So that's me.
All right. So Thank you guys for being here again. One of the reasons why we wanted to have you here was because there's been a lot of talk about the National Association of Realtors and that whole settlement. I believe you guys, the National Association of Realtors is having up to pay $400 and plus million to who, I don't know where that money is going to go actually. So can someone give us a bit of a high level explanation about what's going on and what is actually changing in real estate, I guess?
Want me to take it?
Sure.
I can tell you who's getting the money. Attorneys. I don't know which attorneys, but some really smart attorneys are going to make bank. Everybody else is going to get $1. But I know what's changing initially is that on the MLS, we cannot any longer show cooperative broker commission, which is the way the game has been done since I've been doing it and since long, long before. So for those of you who may not be aware, if you're currently working with an agent, which I know one of our clients is here, you don't pay the agent. The seller pays the agent through the listing agent. That's always how it's been done. So it may feel like it's going to be a dramatic shakeup. There's still a lot of cards in the air because the real estate industry is extremely flexible. Lenders have already made it so that you can put the commissions into the loan. So that's happening. And there's going to be a change in buyer agency agreement. I know one of the questions was going to be about buyer agency. We've always had to do
something that was coming.
We've always had to do a buyer agency agreement. So if you ever worked with us, you may not have noticed it, but you definitely signed a buyer agency agreement because if we ever get audited, we'd be in trouble because we have to say, I'm your agent. And in Illinois, we have to act as a fiduciary. So we have to act in your best interest, not in our best interest. But I think people are going to have to be very clear about it up front now because there's a potential that a buyer might have to pay part of the commission. It's a potential. It's not a certainty by any means. Depends on how well you negotiate and a whole bunch of other things. But that's kind of like the high level of what's going on.
Jake and Mike, did you guys have anything to add to that?
I mean, I'll add just about the objectivity and technically what's going to happen. So after mid-July, these rules will start being implemented. So technically, if you want to see a place that is listed on the MLS, you will have to sign an agreement up front, not just after a contract or further down the line, that you're willing to pay your agent, most likely in this situation. It could be just for a one-off showing, but you're going to have to sign an employment agreement or an engagement nonetheless to see anything that's listed on the MLS. So that's one of the technical changes that's happening. How often it's going to be enforced and, you know, what the best practices are going to be are a little bit TBD, but that will be changing. They're not going to kick that can down the road. It's going to happen in the summer months.
Is there any bit of misinformation that you're seeing circulated in the news or on social media that you want to address and kind of want to nip it in the butt? Is there anything that you're hearing?
I'll jump in real quick just because the one thing I'm hearing relates to these agreements is they're not effectively locking buyers into anything long-term, right? These are completely negotiable. There's not going to be one templated agreement that has to be used across all of MLS, NAR, whatever the situation might be. You can negotiate that agreement for one showing, for one day, for just a certain pocket of the city. So a lot of people are just very worried about well, I'm not going to get locked into a buyer's agreement with an agent and pay them when I find my own place. Well, just negotiate it and make it for a fixed spot or for a fixed amount of time.
You guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say another thing is I've seen misinformation of, well, sellers can't pay commissions now, and they still can. And many sellers, I think, will still offer to pay the agent commission. So it's not necessarily that it can't happen or that it's totally going away. And another misconception I've heard is that it will cause prices to go down, which basic supply and demand is going to tell us that that's not happening.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, I think one of the issues that we're going to see, to get a little bit granular, is that, we've got our comp structure that's set by everything that's been selling for the last, X amount of time, and prices keep going up. And now what I think we're going to see is we're going to see prices actually rise, because now that Fannie Freddie has said that you're allowed to put your commission on top of the normal max allowable credits. As an example, if you're doing a conventional loan less than 10% down, your max allowable credit was 3%. Now you can actually throw on an extra 2.5%, 3% for your agent, and that doesn't count against your max allowable credits. So a house that previously was, selling for $500,000, I think people are thinking that, it's going to sell for less because the buyer's agent commission is going to have to be thrown in there. Well, no, I don't think that that's going to happen. And, we'll see how it plays out. But I think we're going to start to see, we're offering 500 plus we want the seller to pay 12,000. So our actual offer is 512 with a $12,000 credit. And when those start appraising, we're going to start to see the prices rise by 3% because agents are getting paid 3% on top of the prices that are already comped out.
I think that's super interesting. You're already seeing lenders adjust their strategies to kind of accommodate for this commission. I hate saying the word commission because it's like it has a terrible connotation to it. If you've ever worked with an amazing agent who's brought you properties, it's more of a compensation, more of you're compensating them for the service that they're providing and the value that they're giving you. So I feel like moving away of the word commission is so appropriate in this stance because a lot of people are saying, oh, glorified door unlockers. When if you've worked with a great agent, they are helping you not just when you buy the property, but as you hold that property as well. I've had a great experience with John and Sharon. I haven't had the pleasure of working with John and Mike, or Jake and Mike, but I've only heard great things about you guys and heard all your podcasts. And so I think that that's definitely not the word that we want to use. The other thing that I wanted to ask is how about buyers who can't afford it, or who have you heard anything about buyers being excluded from the market because of this rule?
That's it. So there's one really bad thing that's happening. The VA loan is a really big problem that I'm still hearing them kind of work through because they're not allowed to pay a commission, a VA. It's 0% down, and they're in the loan covenant, they're not allowed to pay. So there's a lot of talk about what's going to be done because they're excluding veterans. Clearly, that's not going to happen. They have a couple more months to figure this out, and there's going to be a workaround. But I think the low down payment is going to be tough initially because many buyers that use low down payment loans, like all of us, don't have any money when you start. And then how would you come up with 2.5%? And I think that the reality is, and we work in a lot of markets that are kind of entry level markets, that sellers will still be paying commissions in a lot of cases. I think that's the other thing is that everything's always been negotiable, but most of these sellers want lots of buyers if they're smart so they can get a good price for their house. So they'll still offer a commission. So that's what I'm seeing. But yeah, I think the lower the amount of money the person has, the more this would affect them.
Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you typically in like everything, you get what you pay for, right? So unfortunately, if this leads to a situation or environment where buyers are forced to pay up front or they have to come to the table with money or cash out of pocket to afford an agent, they're going to be at a disadvantage, right? So there's going to be new models that come up. There's going to be flat fee models. There's going to be attorneys that take on more of the role of navigating someone. They're probably going to charge more. But at the same time, if you don't find a way to navigate the commission through the seller, you're ultimately some of the buyers that can't afford representation, will get negatively impacted.
Have either of your companies started modifying how you're going to approach buyers in terms of doing that upfront signing or kind of doing a fee per service or kind of a per showing or per door? Or have you started seeing that, or have you seen other people start modifying their practice?
Yeah, so I mean, we've had pretty extensive talks about it and talks with our agents on our team about like, hey, it's technically up to you what you're going to charge, but you have to put something on paper, and then it's up to you what's worth your time. If opening a couple doors and making a little bit of money is worth your time, great. Because still ultimately people on our team are independent contractors, but we prefer still hey, we want to take on people as clients. And then one of the other things that, we're preparing for is, I got a call today of, somebody calling me direct on a listing, which, has not picked up to the degree that I think it will when the commissions come off of the MLS. But we've had a few more in the last couple weeks than we had gotten in the previous several months. And that's something that we're just going to have to alter our conversations with the seller. It's like, hey, this is what we charge, but there may be people that come direct to us and having our team structure and being pretty geographically spread, we're probably going to have to situate people where a lot of our listings are falling right now, so that we can, show properties to unrepresented buyers more often than we previously were and have some sort of agreement with the seller in place of, if there is dual agency, what does it look like?
So, I mean, we do a lot of listing, and I've been the primary listing agent for about 4 years now, I guess, for our team. And we already have that in the listing agreement anyway. So in other words, when you do a listing presentation with somebody, you say, hey, here's your commission. It's always negotiable. Obviously, agents like to get the most commission, and most people negotiate it. And then you have to break down, at least in ours, what the buyer's agent was getting and what you were advertising. So a lot of this is kind of like not that big of a change because you were already going over this with your seller. So the next listing presentations we have leading up to the change, we're going to say, hey, there's this change coming. We're still going to recommend you offer to pay a buyer's broker because you want to get as many buyers through here as possible. Because I can tell you that every seller I've worked with wants to make the most money possible. That is the only objective I ever hear, except some older sellers or people that are sick want to make as much money as they can fast. But nobody's ever like, sell it for low. I've never had that conversation, right? But I think that's important. A lot of investors, when they come in, they think, oh, the sellers need to think like me. No, I mean, everybody, when you get to the end of your journey, thinks that way. And this was already there. So now it's just a matter of when you have a listing, you say, hey, if an unrepresented buyer comes to us, this would be the commission. And you just walk through it and talk about it like we always have. It's just when that buyer comes, you have to make sure you get an agreement with them right away before you show the property. Easy. One more DocuSign template.
One more DocuSign.
Yay.
Does anyone have any questions about? Go ahead. He's asking if this has any effect on rental.
Yes.
Yes.
You want to expand on that, Jake?
It's really the same rules apply. If you want to show, if you're a tenant rep or a buyer's agent, if you will, in this case, a renter's agent, you still have to get an agreement signed with them to show the place. And unfortunately, I think, the co-op situation is just it's negotiated again. Hey, I have a tenant, landlord or seller, or agent, listing agent. Here's what I'm hoping you'll compensate me for. And hopefully competition's not too steep, right? So the rules have not changed for leasing.
Yeah, but just to add to that, I think that what we're going to see is that landlords inevitably are, not technically real estate professionals. Some are, some aren't, but they are professionals that have been doing stuff in the real estate industry and understand the importance of, offering something in order to get a tenant to limit their vacancy factor. Perhaps, with a little better degree of acumen than your typical, seller of a house that hasn't sold a house in 15 years and doesn't really know what they're doing. Landlords know that it's better to pay a little bit to avoid vacancy. So I think that area we might still see, normal commissions a little bit more often, but none of us technically know.
I think Jake said something important though. There's a technicality. So the commissions can't be advertised on the MLS. And that's going to be a big pain until it's figured out. There's already some workarounds that are being talked about, though. I guess it's a free speech issue to limit agents from advertising on their website a commission that a seller is offering. So that's kind of already something I've been exploring is all right, so you can't advertise it on the MLS. Hey, here's a link to our website if you'd like to see what we're offering. That way, because what I'm concerned about is the 5,000 phone calls every rental listing. We managed 325 apartments and we leased I think it was just under 80 units last year. So I really don't need 1,000 phone calls about, will you pay me? Yes, please show the darn unit. It's on the MLS. I'm happy to pay you. Let's go.
Yeah.
They're going to have to. Yeah. I mean, that's the law, right? Is changing. So it's not going to be just call and get in with any random Redfin agent in an hour. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think bringing up Redfin, I think it'll be interesting to see, what happens to Redfin because their entire model is based off of if you list with us for 1%, then you just have to buy with us. But buying with them is now going to include you have to sign a very exclusive agreement that says we're going to make this much money. So whether or not their model changes on the listing side is going to be interesting because, the buyers are going to have to also know that they're coming out of pocket to pay potentially, sellers again can still pay, but they may have to potentially come out of pocket themselves. So they're not just paying 1%, they're definitely paying 3.5% in total at minimum. So that'll be interesting as well.
And, those are the people who are kind of doing the Redfin thing. Most of those are either first-time home buyers or people who are not true investors. And with investors who are constantly looking at properties, you want an agent who has a good value proposition, who's not just showing you things on the MLS, but who might have access to off-market properties or who have really good relationships with other realtors who can give them a pre-listing or that's where the value comes in. That's where that compensation comes in. I feel like that's a little bit more applicable in terms of like what we're talking about.
I also think you're getting, this was kind of mentioned, but you're also getting access to people who know what they're doing, like through the sale and post sale too, right? So when you have to come and like lease that unit up for the first time, like you text us and we respond immediately with the advice that you need, right? You need a contractor. We are the people who know people, right? So, or even as you're underwriting deals, right? People to ask about who have the experience.
You'll notice on Redfin, though, whether you're looking in Evanston or Joliet, the agent that is assigned to you does not change. So think about that a little bit.
Absolutely.
So when you sign a listing agreement, it's already clear what you're paying the buyer's broker currently. So I don't see why we would change doing that. Well, again, you're representing the buyer. So the question is, are you doing the work to represent the buyer? I mean, it's a tricky thing. A lot of brokerages in the past have not done dual agency because it's one of the main places you get in trouble. I'm the managing broker for our small brokerage, and I've been through an audit. It's not fun. And guess which files they audit? It's always dual agency files. It's any files that you have multiple offers on. Those are the ones that they audit. And so that's the biggest risk point. But now that's going to be something that almost has to be done. So there's going to be a lot of changes for sure. But I don't. The question would be when you're at a listing appointment, if I have to represent that buyer, there's a lot that has to happen. It's not just opening a door, right? It depends where you're at. But we do a lot of suburban work, and there's like town inspections to deal with, explaining what this means. Like, oh, you have to go pay $1,500 in a cashier's check by this day, get this code, bring it back this time, then we can get these stamps. It's not, it's not just opening a door. The opening the door is
The easiest part.
it's the part that really doesn't matter, honestly, in the equation.
Yeah, and I think it depends how you structure it as well. If you have one listing agent who also represents the buyer, I mean, it's up to you up front to negotiate, hey, if that situation happens, do I get a little bit of a discount? Like, sometimes the answer from the agent may be yes, sometimes no. A lot of times, Jake and I will try to represent different sides, and nobody necessarily has to believe that we keep that fiduciary relationship, but we do. Like, we try to separate it so that there's a different name on each file, and it's intra-team dual agency. But in that case, we don't necessarily want to reduce our commission because Jake's doing a completely different set of work than I did. I handled the listing, and, I did everything, went out for photos. He's going to have to now go to the inspection. He's going to have to handle everything with that side of the attorney, any additional like town inspections, things like that. So it depends how the work is divvied up. If it's one agent, you may have a little bit more, leeway with trying to get them to, take it down half a point, something like that. But again, with our team, we try to, separate it so there is true, fiduciary on each side. And then in that case, if we're paying a team member or things like that, we want everybody to be, still fairly compensated. But it comes back to the original reason for this, that everything's technically negotiable.
Do we have any other questions?
To compensate her?
No. So you're asking because a lot of investors, instead of having an investor-friendly agent, go direct to the listing broker, which is something that's pretty common, especially for flippers, right? And you're asking, will anything change, essentially? I mean, that listing agent's going to have you sign some sort of a buyer's agreement, and compensation will have to be discussed. I don't really think anything will change. It depends on what that listing agent had set from the beginning. So if that listing agent set up their listing agreement that they could be paid by the seller, great. If not, then there's going to be less of a win-win actually for you to work direct with many listing agents if they didn't pre-negotiate that.
I think what might start to happen too is a lot of listing agents will develop some type of go-to referral database if they don't have a team. They'll say, hey, if they're a heavy listing agent, they're going to get a lot of these inquiries. They're going to be like, I'm going to send you to Lisa or John. They're going to deal with whatever that compensation is, but they're just going to have a name to hand off to you that they know, and they'll probably get a referral kickback for it, to be transparent. But they're probably not going to, right, like John said, not going to have a lot of incentive to take dual agency and to really pass any savings along to the seller. So you might not see that advantage. You might just have to deal with that agent they connect you to, negotiating them down to something that makes sense for you.
This was what the NAR lawsuit was about, though. Ultimately, like on an individual level, I would be like you in a lot of circumstances where you're always advocating for your best interest. But if you're a listing agent and compensation is not clear, or you have a seller who's not educated, this is exactly why the NAR settlement happened, because there's a strong incentive for you to make double for doing, in theory, less work, right? Especially if you have a savvy investor who's buying cash, knows the area. Unfortunately, this is literally why this happened. So it's kind of sad, but I think that a lot of the incentive will go away, and it might actually make sense for your partner who has the license to now actually represent you on the way through, so you have representation.
Yeah, so in your case, I would say I have somebody. I've worked out a flat fee situation with them. In fact, here's the agreement, and we've done X amount of deals. It's like presenting yourself, presenting your resume. You're like, I have it already arranged. I'm going to be an easy buyer, and I already have a flat fee set up with my wife, friend, cousin, whatever. Like, she's going to help me with the paperwork, and I'd like to make an offer. Like,
That might be more appealing to sellers who don't want to come out of pocket to pay a buyer's agent when you already have a contract with someone you have a relationship with. So that's super interesting. I didn't even think of that. Does anyone else have any questions about the settlement?
Sounds done, right? From what I've been reading.
there's only a few agencies that aren't fully done, if you will, and I think they've left a door open to get more. I guess one thing to point out is, like, they don't want to bankrupt these companies. They want to get paid, right? Like, so they're only going to push as hard as they can to realistically get money. And again, the lawyers are the ones that are making most of it. Like John said, people are probably going to get like a $9 check in a year or two. So yeah, there's still some exposure, but technically NAR is like, they're free and clear. Like, the settlement washes their hands of any wrongdoing up until now.
And just so that we can get a feel for the room, is everyone here currently investing in real estate? Can you put your hands up if you are currently investing? Is there anyone here who has yet to buy their first property? Is anyone investing in 5 units and up, so commercial buildings? All right, so now we kind of know what the crowd is like. So people who are, well, I guess, did you have any questions since it's your first time? No, not really.
No, I just have to get a buyer's agency agreement with her afterwards. We already wrote offers on stuff. So. We were close.
That's fantastic.
So close.
So if there's anyone who's going to watch this who is a new investor, what incentivizes them to work with an investor-friendly agent versus like, oh, my cousin who sells houses, I'm going to go work with them? Like, what makes you guys different than my cousin Bob, who said he's going to help me buy property?
Everything.
Can you guys expand on that?
I think it's about too, like, if you're trying to specialize, you want to work with a specialist, right? Like, if I was going to go get, like, I don't know, heart surgery, right? I wouldn't go to a foot surgeon. You want somebody who is dealing with the things, who can notice red flags in rental buildings that your average agent is not going to notice, who can give you advice on how to structure deals that your average agent might not be aware of because they're not in that investing space. And then also to be a long-term resource for you. Often I find new investors they're so focused on, like, how can I save the most amount of money up front? Right? How can I do this the cheapest? But, like, one thing to not cheap out on is your team, because they're going to be there for you. And so my biggest advice is, like, don't be penny wise and pound foolish with that.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different factors that go into it. I mean, first of all, an investor-friendly agent doesn't necessarily have to own property, but if they have, they understand all of the little nuances that go with property and how to modulate your repair expenses, what things are actually going to cost in terms of, your overhead and all of that goes with the property. So when they're underwriting, they know how to do it. I mean, it goes as basic as, Bob, this poor Bob guy, who's his cousin. Bob thinks that when you have $2,700 of rent and a $2,400 mortgage payment, that there's $300 of cash flow. Bob doesn't know. Bob doesn't know about the water bill. Bob doesn't know how to, put in reserves and, underwrite management, even if you're going to self-manage. Like Sharon was saying, Bob doesn't know anything about property, even though Bob's selling property. Bob just got his license. Bob doesn't know that, galvanized pipe is only going to last you 80 years. So when you're looking at two exact properties that, one of them has been, had the plumbing fully updated and the other one hasn't, the numbers are the exact same, why you should go with the one versus the other. There's so many little things that go along with it. And then not just that, and, it's access to deals, because anybody can look on the MLS, but when you've been in the industry for a while and you've built a reputation of representing, buyers, especially on the investment side, that like everybody up here has, inevitably there's going to be sellers. And, I've said it a million times, I will never fully understand why, but there are sellers that don't want to go to market. They want to keep things off the market, even if it means making a little bit less money. If it's that they don't want to bother their tenants, then great. They're a great person. They're going to make a little bit less money doing it that way. But we have the relationships to get them those deals because, they may not come directly to us. Like it may not be our seller, but we know the agents that are representing that seller and are pushing it off market, and we can get it to you when you otherwise wouldn't have seen it. And Bob definitely wouldn't have seen it because Bob doesn't know anybody.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Obviously, they've answered most of the question. The only other thought I had is operations. Once you own the property, you own it. Now it's not a spreadsheet. You have to actually get a renter, or you have to flip it. You have to get a contractor. Oh, you don't know a contractor? Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? How do you find somebody to clean it? Unless I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but within the last 5 years, I've junked out my own unit, which is insane. I now have 2 awesome junk companies that we use. So yeah, all those hours I spent driving stuff to Goodwill, I could have just made one phone call now. So, but that experience you get by going through those things, having bed bugs, yay, having a roof leak, having a plumbing leak, having a flood on July 2nd of last year that hits 27 apartments all at the same time. Hey, you get to the other side of that and you're like, hey, it's cool. The buildings are still there. Some of the people left. New people are here. We're making money. Yay. And you have that experience to understand how the spreadsheet actually happens, not just like, oh, I found the spreadsheet on Bigger Pockets. And, so I think that's really where the rubber meets the road, is having an experienced team. They're going to be with you through the journey.
Do you guys say what markets you guys specialize in, or is it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we're pretty widespread. And we did that intentionally just because, when we source an investor, they might want to be in McHenry, or they might want to be in Gurnee, or they might say, hey, I only want to buy in Oswego. So we've, got a pretty widespread. Jake's out in Burr Ridge. I'm in the city of Chicago. So we got people all throughout Chicago, South Side, North Side, everywhere. We got 28 agents on our team, so we've just wanted to have a wide geographic reach, and then we try to have our agents in those areas, become experts in those areas. So a bit of a reach.
And I'll say too, for us, it's less about geography, more about like the buyer, the investor type. And we're pretty clear usually up front that like, we're not here to source distressed deals. We're not wholesalers. Our team, where we add the most value, is to people that are entry level, need the, not only the deal, because the deal can kind of come from anywhere, but really need like an advocate or someone to advise them, versus people are like, right, if it's a wholesaler or flipper, yeah, they're doing maybe most of the legwork, they have the most their own procurement process. We're not going to come up with that necessarily direct to seller marketing campaign for you or hire your ISA for you. I mean, we could give you some tips and tricks, but that's not what we do. We focus on 2 to 4 unit buyers in a certain price range, a certain asset class. For us, it's, C or better. We don't really get into D class properties. Not saying you can't make money there. It's just not what we do. And we usually tell people up front, we'll add some value there, but we're not going to add the value that's going to keep you coming back probably for more. And those also aren't the type of properties that we have unique access to. We're not, we're communicating with John, we're communicating with other investor-friendly brokers that they have up-and-coming listings in certain areas. And there's just certain areas we don't have those. So I think it's important to ask the agent you're working with, right? Like, where do you service? Well, we service everywhere. Okay, maybe fine, but have you serviced this type of building, this size, and this building class?
I'll let Sharon answer that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we cover a pretty wide range. I would say we do majority of the city, west suburbs, south suburbs, a little bit on the north side, but like pretty far north. I don't think we do a whole lot once you get too far north of the city. So.
And there's 3 of us, not 28. Rudy's the other one.
Do you guys have any neighborhoods specifically that you feel like are kind of under the radar that investors have not quite caught on to yet, that you kind of want to give us a little bit of a key insight into?
I think less about a specific neighborhood, but I think with the whole 5% down owner occupy loan now going conventional instead of having to deal with the self-sufficiency test for FHA, I think we're going to see a lot of upside in the neighborhoods that have those 3 to 4 units in that range from, let's call it 750 to 1.25 million, just do very well, right? Because before, that leverage was almost impossible. You couldn't put 5% down on a $1.4 million 4 unit. It wasn't possible. Now the cash flow is not good. There is no cash flow at 5% down, but you can still buy it, right? That was
self-sufficiency.
no self-sufficiency test. So to answer your question, I think the areas that have inventory like that, and if you're buying something that has the upside to be sold in an area where you're outside of the FHA, but you're still within the 5% down conforming limits for 2 to 4 unit, you are on the, you're on the path of progress. And when rates, and if and when rates come down, you'll be looking good. People that have those beautiful, 3 units for $1.1 million, yeah, maybe they don't look great right now at 5%, but
Eventually.
Eventually they can.
Time is always on your side in real estate, I guess.
Yeah.
How about you, John?
It's tough because you can normally find something to cash flow in most of the working class suburbs and neighborhoods in Chicago if you're willing to wait and you're willing to put some elbow grease in. So I guess, there's always going to be, the thing I love about Chicago is there's a place for everybody. I feel like if you have a small amount of money and you're willing to go into, a working class neighborhood, you can do well. We are seeing, similar to what Jake said, a lot of opportunity. We've sold a few deals recently that I'm excited about that are like around Humboldt Park, Wicker Park, like Logan Square, Fringe, very Fringe. Yeah, Logan Square is like Pilsen used to be, or it's getting bigger and bigger. But yeah, and I agree. The 5% down is a game changer. I was almost crying when it disappeared in was it July of, was it 19? It was terrible because FHA is just such a challenging tool for investors to use. So the 5% down is the go-to for sure. It'll be interesting to see what happens now as we, add all the stuff we just talked about to the equation. But yeah.
So how about this? Let's talk about like market trends with the interest rates now potentially staying higher for longer. If you're someone who's wanting to get into real estate and cash flow is something that's like kind of really important to you, where would you recommend them to go? Since a lot of these like kind of higher price buildings don't cash flow, where would you recommend newer investors to go that need that cash flow to kind of survive?
If you can, I'm not saying if you can afford it, but entertaining legitimate commercial properties is important if you are looking in the right price range, right? So looking at $1 million 3 units in Avondale and Logan is appealing. It's nice. It's, maybe the tenant class is in your peer group. Maybe the buildings are nice and beautiful and brick, but they don't cash flow very well, right? But $1 million 5 unit in Brighton Park or, Cicero or something that, a smaller price per door, you're going to get a lower interest rate. The financing is different, right? You're probably going to have to put a little bit more down. But the cash flow is going to look different. A mixed use property as well, a 3 or 4 unit mixed use that has a little bit more risk, but most likely a higher cap rate than something that's a 3 or 4 unit pure residential. Just understanding the financing there. But those people that have those budgets where you can get into a C class or a B class mixed use or pure commercial property, comparing it to a 3 or 4 unit, you're going to see slightly better numbers.
Yeah, I think what people don't understand in terms of commercial property is that you really need to talk to a lot of lenders. A lot more than you actually think you need to talk to. You've talked to 10, you have to talk to 10 more because every commercial lender is completely different in terms of what they want. They all want to know the same information from you, so you're going to regurgitate every single financial report that you have. But what they can offer you is all different. The nuances are so different. So I think that what you said is completely true because you can cash flow commercial building because of just what the lender is going to be able to do. John, how about you? Any neighborhoods that you can think off of the top of your head that would cash flow still?
Yeah, it's a tough question. Like I said, we just sold one kind of in the Wicker Park area that does cash flow, which is insane with some elbow grease. But I would say a lot of the neighborhoods, we have a couple investors that do Little Village. They're still finding deals there. They're tougher to find, but they're there. You have to work through some issues. I think like the Brighton Parks, all the areas kind of in the working class areas there, and you can find value. You just have to work through a lot of old building issues like wall furnaces, galvanized pipes, some funky construction framing. Like, you might, I remember there was one building we showed in Pilsen where it was like actually trees was the framing. And that's not like they had like old trees they just cut and that was what they used. It was insane. And that's not that uncommon. They're around still. So But if you can find a good building in some of these areas, there's still cash flow. I mean, we have sold deals that have cash flowed really well for people. I think it's a very different play than your, Avondale or, Fringe Logan Square 3 flat. I mean, you have to get your hands dirty, but you can make money. And I think the cool thing is I have a lot of these types of rentals, and I sleep well at night because there's such a huge demand for apartments that rent for like $1,000 a month. I mean, when we have those types of units we rent out, we get about 200 to 300 leads that want to see it. And we show it to about 20, and we get about 5 to 15 applications.
Wow.
And it normally fills within a week. So it has some bonuses that people don't think about, right? Versus maybe a $3,000 a month apartment where your pool is much smaller of people that can afford it, and could also potentially sag. I don't think those lower end rents will sag. So it's a big, long-winded answer. I think you can find that product all over Chicago, though. You could go to Aurora, you could go to Rockford, you could go to Joliet, Elgin, all the neighborhoods in Chicago that aren't Avondale and Logan Square, Go where there's no trendy coffee shops. There's just 7-Elevens and McDonald's. Get to work.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to your willingness to sometimes even go a couple blocks. It might be a full city, it might be a couple blocks. One that comes to mind because it's been creeping for a couple of years, but if the cap rate on Rockwell at this point doesn't make sense for you, just east of Humboldt Park, maybe you go a couple blocks west of Humboldt Park, not necessarily because you want to, but because you're just getting pushed a little bit. Like maybe instead of a 6.5 cap, you can get a 7 cap if you just go a couple blocks away. And yeah, I think that'll be good. The more quality investors that go into specific areas, the better the area is going to be if you maintain your property. But we're going to see a lot of people that are just budging a little bit on not necessarily cap rate. There will be people that budge on cap rate and just accept a lower return. But at the same time, there's also going to be a fair amount of people that budge a little bit on area. Maybe I don't want to name too many names, but maybe X city, has a decent reputation for getting 7.25 cap rates, but that's not as much cash flow as you really need. So you go one city over, and all of a sudden it's 7.75, 8% cap rate, and it starts to get into that cash flow threshold. And it's a slight step down in terms of overall socioeconomics, but in the same breath, it's not so much different that it doesn't make more sense to you to make it 11% cash on cash versus 6%. So I think I've seen some of that personally, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of that because the economy doesn't seem to be easing up at all. It's staying too strong. So I had made some initial predictions in the earlier part of the year when the CPI was trending in the right direction. It's not trending that way anymore. And so I think we're going to see a little bit more prolonged period of people having to push out into, slightly more fringe areas.
So CPI is a consumer price index, and you're talking about inflation kind of holding steady or actually getting worse instead of getting better, which it was initially doing better at the beginning of the year, and now it's kind of creeping in the wrong direction. And that's why interest rates are kind of staying higher for longer, is like the verbiage that we're kind of hearing. For people who don't know, can you explain to them just pretty high level what a cap rate is, Mike?
So my easiest explanation for cap rate is if you buy a property all cash, that is your net income divided by your purchase price. So if you buy a property for $1 million and let's say it's got 150,000 of gross income and it's got 50,000 of expenses, then you're buying at a 10 cap because you have that 100,000 of net income divided by your $1 million purchase price. So that's the easiest way to look at it. They are essentially equalizers for commercial properties. When you go area by area, your Lincoln Park is probably going to be, on a new construction, 5.5 cap. If it's got a little bit of age and wear on it, it's going to be closer to a 5.75, 6% cap rate. Maybe in today's environment, you can get somebody to sell it to you at 6.25, 6.5. But that doesn't necessarily mean the same output because as the interest rate changes, your cap rate, depending on leverage, the output changes completely on what your actual cash on cash is going to be. If you put down 30% instead of 25%, whatever it is. But it is, just essentially your net income, into your purchase price. And then, like I said, if you're getting a loan, it changes a little bit.
Are you seeing any of these commercial properties pop up on the market where the owners can't refinance because they're over leveraged or their interest rates have just gone through the roof and they can't make the refinance? Are these properties coming online, and are people buying them before they can before the bank can take the property back?
I mean, I'm a commercial buyer, so I'm looking, and it's very active. It's still very healthy. So it's not like you're the only buyer out there if you're looking. There's also a lot of people who are still putting down 35%. Stinks because I don't like to put down, I don't have 35% ever. Never have, probably never will. So, at least in the markets I'm looking at, which would be like I'm looking in those suburbs where I invest and also the north side pretty actively. There is nothing that's easy. You have to normally create a deal. You can't just buy a 10 cap. And at least the rates that I'm getting quoted from lenders, and I'm shopping lenders pretty hard right now, are all in the sevens for commercial, all.
How many lenders do you usually talk to, John?
So I've had a good relationship with a local lender. I'm about to hit their legal lending limit, which is kind of insane. So I'm going to be running out of runway with them very soon. So I'm talking to quite a few right now. I think I sent out emails to 8 or 9 local lenders. I've worked with, I think, 4 locally here in Chicago that are not agencies, Freddie Mac and Fannie. Those are different. I have done multiple loans with them too, but yeah, there's a lot of great local banks in Chicago. That's the fun thing. You start to really find them all when you start shopping commercial. There's a lot. It's fun. It's the wild, wild west.
Again, I want to open up for any questions before we close it out. Does anybody have any questions last minute?
I won't address specifically like West Humboldt or West Logan, but I can tell you what like the other side of that is done, which is like Portage Park, right? So it's a little bit sandwiched there. I remember when I first started doing some deals like 5 years ago, 2 units plus garden units were 2-unit buildings plus a nice garden unit was trading for like high 3s, and that was in like good condition. And now it's high 4s easily. So I know that just from direct experience, and this is Portage Park where there is no public transportation, right? So it's really just a matter of, and what's happening too is people are still used to, now because of not having to commute downtown, I still think we're in this still post-COVID era, right? Where you can still work from home and a lot of people just have a car. So I don't tell like my buyers to focus too much on walkability or public transportation. I focus more on what are the market rents telling me, right? Like what are if the rents are going up, they're going up for a reason. We're not, I don't know anything that someone else doesn't, like they're going to build a new blue line stop, like, a mile west of here. It's, I focus more on, what are the rents doing?
Yeah, and I think, this is something that I researched pretty extensively a couple of years ago. And, obviously it's only every 10 years that we get census data. But, we can make assumptions. From 2010 to 2020, the amount of available housing units only went up by 6.4%. And the population in the U.S. over the age of 18 went up by 10.3%. And so our population is outpacing the amount of available housing units. And that doesn't include the fact that in 2020 and 2021, we had, supply chain issues and all sorts of issues with, getting lumber and things like that. So that may have even fallen off more than the population is growing. People are living longer, all of that, and they got to go somewhere. And so, maybe your most desirable area is close to the blue line, but if you can't afford $2,100 for a 2-bed, 1-bath, you can only afford $1,600. There's nothing you can do. If you want to be in that area, if you like that area, you may just have to, get a car, because an extra $500 a month, $6,000, you could buy an okay car and be at a break even after year 1 on a car instead of, being near the blue line. So there's a lot of factors that will eventually just push people to areas that they wouldn't necessarily prefer to live. And now the prices will go up. But, I've got a 3-unit in Lakeview that anytime I list one of the rentals, 2 blocks from Wrigley Field, very nice units, it basically goes highest and best on a rental. So we're going to see some of that. But then the people that lose out on that, I had 14 showings in an hour span for one of my units about a month ago. Those people have to live somewhere. And so they're going to go to areas and have to pay a little bit less rent in an area that's a little bit more than it was getting the year before because they don't have a choice. So I think that it may be long-term macro that we're going to start to see this happen even more and more and more. But there's not a lot of extra area to build around here, as you can see. There's not a lot of open land. I know that they're trying to favor density. You know, if they're tearing down an old single family, they may try and put up a 4 or 6 unit, something like that. But that's not going to happen enough to outpace the population growth. So people are just going to have to accept it. So if you're close enough, you're adjacent to a decent area, I think you're still going to be okay as long as the numbers make sense.
Whoever wants to go.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your goals are. I am very much, I consider myself somewhat of a bad investor because, the place that I just bought, I'm still going to be, I'm going to be moving in with my girlfriend and we're going to be splitting things, but I'm still going to be out of pocket like $2,000. I'm thinking, 2 years down the line when I've raised the rents to market, and they're not that much below market, but, $125 here, $200 there is going to make a slight difference. And I'm hoping that in a year or two that I can even get it down to a 6% interest rate because, 6% on the loan that I've got is going to be, $800 a month. And then it also comes down to, we have a rent versus buy calculator that our team uses. What's your current situation? Are you living at home with mom and dad? Then, and it's a cushy situation, great. But if you're paying $2,500, $3,000 a month in rent, is your situation better off? And we try to not just look at cash flow, but, look at your principal pay down, look at your, average appreciation. We don't assume anything more than, basic inflation rate, even though it could happen. We just want to be safe with our assumptions there. Are you in a better overall financial situation net worth wise? And, if you listen to, Barbara Corcoran, she talked about as soon as rates go down, which that may not be this year, it may not be next year, the prices are just going to take off because unless we all of a sudden hit a 4.5% interest rate, who's going to give up their 3% rates right now? Nobody's going to want to touch that. They're not going to want to sell. So people are going to hoard properties. They're going to sit on them. So unless it gets to a point where it makes sense to sell because they can get into something else that still makes sense. And so we're still going to have an inventory issue and people are going to go back to highest and best and it's going to drive prices up. So if you're in a situation where it's comfortable long-term and you make good money, I'm working with a lawyer right now who makes a couple $100,000 a year. He's fine with that situation. But if you're like, I don't have much money, I need cash flow, well, then we got to start to look into some of the fringe areas because, it's all dependent on who your client is and what their individual needs are.
Real estate, yeah, I think always favors the long term, right? And the best time to buy was yesterday or like 15 years ago. But yeah, like I've talked to people or you talk to clients and like you see them 3 years later and they still haven't bought anything and they're waiting for the rates to go down. And it's like you might have just bought something that maybe barely cash flowed for you at that point because now you're going to be 3 years later, you're going to have increased rents, you're going to have increased like value of the property, right? You can pull that money out, you could do something with it, you could sell it. Just gives you a lot more options. So yeah, I understand the cash flow is tight, but I think waiting is also a dangerous game. Go ahead.
Referrals. So commercial lenders, yeah, I mean it's all word of mouth referrals. A lot of them don't advertise super well. So, but like for me, you can also talk to, like I buy a lot from commercial agents. So I'll say, who's closing deals right now? Who's refinancing right now? Who have you seen do a great job on like a messy value add like I like to buy? I just ask them and I keep just building the Rolodex. There's a couple commercial loan brokers I've worked with. And when I talk to them, they're like, well, you already know most of the banks. So it's not in this market, right? If I went in a different market, it wouldn't be. But so, I mean, it depends too where you're at in the city. Like the bank that we use on the north side doesn't really like my stuff in Berwyn and Cicero, unfortunately. Like I've talked to the banker and he's always like, yeah, we'll get back to you. And then doesn't. So you're like, cool. So you just have to find like who likes the buy box that you like and then build that rapport. And oftentimes it's a little different than with a regular lender. Like I just had a good conversation with a lender we're probably going to do some business with. And he's like, we really value relationship deposits. It's really important to us that you have money on it. I'm just like, okay, cool. I get it. You want me to put 25,000 in a CD when we do our next deal? I get it. So like, you have to ask what they need, and I think that's important in any kind of deal is figuring out how you can help them so they can help you. So
Yeah, if it's one of your first deals, I don't think there's an issue using a commercial broker, mortgage broker. You can negotiate the fee down a little bit too. There's ways to make sure it's worth your while. And then it's not going to be a secret who they use eventually, right? You'll see the bank's name, and then you will usually see a list of banks that they are shopping your loan against. And you know, they add value too. Like they're the middleman, and they, you know, will guide you a little bit. So first deal or two, have a couple brokers, I think, in your Rolodex to at least compare things to. They're not going to usually ask for a commitment or a fee up front, so it doesn't take much extra work.
I oftentimes tell clients like April and Julian, though, when they start to outgrow us, that's when I get to help them one last time by introducing them to everybody I know in the commercial world from having invested for almost 10 years. So that's like the parting gift. And it's so I've had a bunch of clients that kind of start making the pivot, which I think they're making, to buying commercial. And it's cool because then into competition, but friendly competition, right? And you get to see them grow and buy these bigger deals, and it's fun. So I guess, you know, if you're working with an agent like that's up here, I'm sure these guys have, you know, the same list of banks. There's not that many banks in Chicago to do these deals. So that's probably something you would go to that original agent for and still get that value from them for free at that point. Don't have to pay a commission. Woohoo!
So you're asking if an investor is coming, what details do you want to know from their buy box that would make them an ideal client for you?
I like to know how long they've been in Chicago, if they have family here, what they're, you know, are they putting down roots here? I've actually told a lot of people not to buy who are like in the area for school or thinking about it. And they're like, well, I'm probably going to move to California in a year or two. I'm like, yeah, this isn't probably the time for you to do that, right? But if somebody's from Chicago or a suburb or something like that, I'll oftentimes say, where's your family from? Oh, they're from Schaumburg. Oh, cool. Oh, we live in the south suburbs. Are you thinking of building a portfolio that makes sense with your life there? I don't know if that was the right answer to your question. I mean, we've worked with clients that have a lot of money and a little money, and we've had many of them have success in both scenarios. So it's not necessary to have, you know, a boatload of money to start with, but I think you have to start with the end in mind and know kind of what you want. And that's the tricky part.
And be transparent about how much capital you have to spend, right? I think you talk to a lot of people, and you know, we're not your financial advisor. Yes, and maybe it's the first time we're speaking over the phone, but when I ask you like how much money you have to spend in this next deal, like don't like clam up, like, or don't lie to me. You know, like you can give me a range, and I don't need your bank account, but you know, it's important for me to know how much you have to spend, because then I'm going to work backwards on, is this the right neighborhood? Is this the right strategy? Or are we just way off, right? Because if that changes or you're not telling us like up front really what that looks like, it's going to be a little bit of a waste of time.
I think also a willingness to learn and take ownership of the process. I'll have a lot of like newer investors come to me and they just want me to find them a deal or me to tell them it's a good deal. And a willingness to like learn, like I will help you learn how to run numbers, and I will help you, I'll look over your numbers and I'll answer your questions, but like you need to know yourself that it's a good deal, like not just because Sharon said so. So I think a willingness to really embrace all the process and not just have me tell you every step of the way what I think.
Does that answer your question, Chris? So yeah, if there was a newer investor that came to you, what would immediately turn you off to them? What are things that they say that you'd be like, oh, this guy's not serious. This guy's just wasting my time, because nobody wants to be a time waster. So what are the things that we can avoid as investors when we are talking with an agent who is an investor friendly agent?
So
That's a loaded question right there.
I'm gonna throw out the low hanging fruit, and don't get me wrong, everybody in here wants this. But if you're the first thing that you tell me is, oh, I'm only looking for seller finance deals, I'm like, yeah, so are all of us. You know, because if you're only looking for seller finance deals, it's a lot harder to find than people realize. And because there's a lot less sellers that it makes sense for. You know, why would a seller want to, you know, carry back at 4% right now with all the risk that it entails, rather than just cashing out right now? You know, if you have the ability to, you know, buy traditional, but you just prefer seller financing, then of course you do. Like, it's logical. If we can find somebody who's willing to, you know, do interest only at 5% for the next 7 years, then that probably makes sense.
I'll pay you a commission.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's hard to find those deals. It's very hard to find those deals. So that's one of the first things that, yeah, if somebody comes to me and they're like, yeah, I'm only looking for seller finance deals, or if they come to me and be like, hey, I'm working with, multiple people, I'm just seeing what you have.
Yep.
I mean, great. If it fits your perfect buy box and we have an off market property, but Jake and I try to say this all the time, like, yeah, occasionally we'll get, seller direct stuff. Of course we will, but there's thousands of agents in Chicago. There's 51,000 agents in the state of Illinois. Most of our off market is, hey, this guy from this commercial brokerage actually brought us a deal, but he doesn't have a buyer for it. So he's seeing who our buyer is. And then we don't know who you're talking to. We don't know what you've seen. So that complicates things for us.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off that, right? If they kind of tell you that they want to work with multiple agents and whoever can bring them a deal, and I'm like, great, if I have a deal, I'm probably going to bring it to my loyal clients first. That's just how it works, And, I think it's fine to interview a few agents, and I think people should do that. But I think eventually you need to commit to somebody and stick to somebody, no matter who that is.
And now with the ruling, you kind of have to, you have to sign an agreement hopefully beforehand so that there's no double buyer's agent thing going on. Go ahead.
That'll probably happen to some. I've been in the business for almost 10 years, which is not very long. And talking to some of the agents that are veterans, I mean, things have changed every so often. There used to actually be listing books that each office would have. If we wanted to get their listings, I'd have to call them, can you fax me the listing? This wasn't that long ago. This was when my parents were buying a house. And then everything went online. And there's always transitions and changes. But what the NAR did for agents, although it initially didn't look that great, it protected agents from being liable. So all of us could have in theory been sued, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, but that's besides the point. NAR was looking out for the agent's best interest in this case and also trying to keep the market working and flowing for consumers. I don't really know why I would go start my own little NAR. It just seems like a really big waste of time. Maybe a Berkshire Hathaway type place might consider it, but I don't know. There definitely will be some people that do it. There's talk of it already, but it just seems like probably won't be a big thing, and it probably won't have much impact at all for investors. I just don't see how it would really change much for normal people.
And you have to be a member of NAR to be on the MLS right now, as an agent. So if I quit NAR, I wouldn't have MLS access, which is a big deal.
And commercial agents aren't usually in the MLS already. So this has already been happening. There are plenty of agents out there that operate outside of an association, or it's a different type of association, and they do plenty of deals. So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of changing that, especially the consumer is going to see directly.
I think the agents who will leave are the agents who don't bring value other than what you see on Redfin or the MLS. The agents who are not putting in any extra work, or who are not, doing that extra, I have these off-market deals that, people are bringing to me. I mean, those are the agents who are not doing anything else but the bare minimum. Those are the ones that are going to leave. Stop being agents.
The fees just aren't that much to be in the. I don't know what they are, which should tell you something. It's so small that $200 a year. I don't even know. For the NAR portion of it, it's nothing. Yeah.
Any other questions, guys? I mean, I just want to give these guys a huge round of applause. Thank you, Jake, Mike, John, Sharon. We're going to wrap up the meetup, start networking. But first, we want to take a picture by the taps over here, and we can start networking. Thank you guys again so much. Guys, thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah.